The click of the deadbolt was the only sound that brought Lena Washington a sliver of peace. A second click, as she turned the key again, was for good measure. It was a ritual, a prayer against the dark. Outside, the manicured lawns of Maple Creek, Colorado, lay sleeping under a blanket of suburban tranquility. But Lena knew tranquility was a lie. It was just the quiet space between threats. From her living room window, partially obscured by the tasteful beige curtains she'd chosen to project a sense of normalcy, she watched him. The new neighbor, the one in the house across the street, the one whose windows remained dark and unwelcoming. Ethan Hayes. He was out there again. For the third night this week, he was in his front yard, a hulking silhouette against the faint glow of a street lamp. He wasn't doing anything overtly criminal. He wasn't peering into windows or rattling doorknobs. He was just there. Pacing a tight 3-step line on his driveway, his head bowed, his face illuminated by the stark white light of his phone. His fingers moved with a frantic energy, a blur of motion. Then he'd stop, stare at the screen with an unnerving intensity, and resume his agitated pacing. It's not paranoia, if it happened before. The thought was a cold, familiar mantra. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat she couldn't silence. She saw not a grieving widower, as the neighborhood gossip mill had quietly labeled him, but the ghost of another man. In another city. A man whose obsession had forced her to sell her home, change her number, and flee to a place like Maple Creek. A place that promised safety. She backed away from the window, her breath catching in her throat. "Marcus?" she called, her voice a little too loud in the silent house. A muffled, "Yeah?" echoed from upstairs. "You locked the back door?" "Yes, Mom." "Like an hour ago." The teenage exasperation in his voice was a sharp sting. He didn't understand. To him, her vigilance was an annoyance, a cage. To her, it was the only thing keeping them safe. She crept back to the window. The man Ethan had stopped pacing. He was standing perfectly still now, one hand braced against the side of his house, the other holding the phone up as if he were scanning the neighborhood. His posture was rigid, his focus absolute. To Lena, it looked like he was mapping something, targeting something, or someone. Her mind flashed with images she fought to suppress. A slashed tire, a note on her windshield, the chilling realization that someone had been inside her old apartment. The police had been sympathetic, but ultimately useless. "There's not much we can do until he actually does something, Miss Washington." She would not wait for him to do something. Not this time. Her hand, slick with sweat, closed around her own phone on the kitchen counter. Her thumb hovered over the screen. This was crazy, wasn't it? Calling the police on a man for standing in his own yard. He was a white man, in a quiet, affluent neighborhood. They'd think she was the crazy one. A hysterical black woman making trouble. The thought made her stomach clench. But then she looked out the window again. He was still there. A statue of pure intent. The fear, cold and absolute, overrode everything else. It was a primal instinct. The need to protect her child, her home, her sanctuary. She took a deep, shuddering breath and dialed. 911, what's your emergency? "Hello," Lena said, her voice a strained whisper. I need to report suspicious activity. My neighbor, he's outside, and I don't know what he's doing, but it's not right. It feels wrong." Across the street, Ethan Hayes was not a predator. He was a man on the verge of throwing his $1,000 smartphone into the street. And our synergistic framework allows for a dynamic response protocol that maximizes client retention. The voice on the other end of his earbuds droned on. Ethan gritted his teeth, staring at the frozen, pixelated face on his screen. The video call for the junior IT support position a job so far beneath his old skill set, it was laughable had dropped for the 4th time. The Wi-Fi signal in his house, a cavernous, empty space that echoed with the ghost of his wife's laughter, was inexplicably garbage. "Mr. Hayes, are you still there?" "Yes, sorry," Ethan managed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "My connection seems to be unstable." One moment. He killed the call and ripped the earbuds out. Frustration burned in his chest. This was his life now, begging for a corporate drone job because his old life, the one where he was a sought-after cybersecurity analyst in Silicon Valley, had burned to the ground, along with the wreckage of his wife's car. He had moved to Maple Creek to disappear, to be anonymous, to let the world forget he existed. Apparently, his internet service provider had gotten the memo, but this wasn't a provider issue. He knew the signs. The lag wasn't random. It was rhythmic. The bandwidth was being throttled by a constant, heavy data stream. Someone was siphoning his connection. Annoyance, sharp and clear, cut through the fog of his grief. It was a familiar feeling, a ghost of his former self. He walked to the living room, ignoring the dust-covered boxes and the framed photo of him and Sarah on the mantel, the one where she was laughing, her head thrown back in the California sun. He pulled up his router's admin panel on his phone. His fingers, the same ones Lena saw as frantic and menacing, flew across the screen with the practiced ease of a master craftsman. He scrolled through the list of connected devices, his laptop, his phone, his smart television, and one more. An intruder. The device name wasn't a random string of numbers. It was labeled intentionally, almost arrogantly. Aegis Node 01. A cold knot formed in Ethan's stomach. This wasn't some kid next door stealing Wi-Fi to play video games. This was deliberate, sophisticated. The name felt like a signature. He had to get a better signal to run a proper diagnostic, to kick the parasite off his network and lock it down. The strongest signal came from the repeater he'd installed on the exterior wall of his garage. He grabbed his phone and stepped outside into the cool Colorado night. He leaned against the brick, the rough texture grounding him as he initiated a trace route. His entire focus narrowed to the glowing screen, to the lines of code and data packets. He began building a new firewall, his fingers a blur, his mind sinking into the comfortable, logical world of ones and zeros. This, at least, was a problem he could solve, a monster he could slay. He was so absorbed, so completely lost in the task, that he didn't hear the whisper of tires on asphalt. He didn't notice the world holding its breath around him. He only looked up when the night exploded in flashing red and blue. The light swept across his face, blinding him, pinning him like an insect in a display case. A police cruiser was angled across his driveway, its doors opening. 2 officers emerged, their forms backlit and intimidating. For a moment, Ethan's mind went blank. He looked from the police car to his phone, then back to the officers. A dozen possibilities, all of them bad, raced through his head. Then, across the street, he saw a curtain fall back into place. He saw a shadow disappear from a window. And he understood. A deep, weary sigh escaped his lips. The flicker of his old, capable self was extinguished, replaced by a familiar, crushing weight. He didn't move. He just stood there, bathed in the accusatory lights, and waited. Here we go. The crunch of gravel under their boots was the only sound breaking the sudden silence. The 2 officers approached cautiously, their hands hovering near their belts. The older one, his face a roadmap of long nights and too much coffee, radiated a weary calm. His name tag read Rossi. The younger one, Michigan LLER, had a rigid posture and an impatient energy that set Ethan's teeth on edge. "Evening, sir," Rossi said, his voice even. He stopped about 10 feet away. "We received a call about some unusual activity. Mind telling us what you're doing out here?" From across the street, a screen door creaked open. Ethan saw Lena Washington step onto her porch, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She stayed there, a sentinel in the shadows, her presence a silent, heavy accusation. Ethan kept his own voice flat, devoid of emotion. It was a defense mechanism he'd perfected. "I live here," he said, gesturing vaguely toward his front door. "I was fixing my Wi-Fi." Miller let out a short, skeptical laugh. "Fixing your Wi-Fi? At 10 o'clock at night? Pacing around in your driveway?" He shared a look with Rossi, a look that said, "We've got a live one." "My connection was compromised," Ethan explained, the technical words feeling absurd in the cold night air. "Someone is leeching my bandwidth. I came out here to get a stronger signal to diagnose the breach." "He's lying." Lena's voice, sharp and clear, cut through the tension. All 3 men turned to look at her. She took a hesitant step forward, stopping at the edge of her lawn. "He's been out here for nights. Just watching. He's always watching. Tonight, he was messing with that phone, pointing it all around. It's not normal." Ethan felt a surge of hot frustration. He forced it down. Getting angry would only make him look guiltier. I wasn't pointing my phone at anything, he said, turning back to the officers. I was running a diagnostic. It's a network analysis app. An app? Miller repeated, his tone dripping with condescension. Sure. Look, sir, why don't you just show us some ID and we can clear this all up? Ethan didn't move. The request was standard, but the situation wasn't. He was being treated like a suspect on his own property because of a neighbor's unfounded paranoia. A deep-seated stubbornness, a relic of his former, more confident self, kicked in. Am I being detained, officer? Miller's jaw tightened. It's a simple request, and it's a simple question. Rossi stepped forward, raising a placating hand. Let's all just take a breath. Sir, my partner is right. This can all be over in a minute. The complainant, he nodded toward Lena, is concerned for her safety. We're just doing our due diligence. Her concern is based on what, exactly? Me standing in my own yard? Ethan challenged, his gaze flicking to Lena. He saw her flinch, but her expression remained resolute. It's the pattern, she insisted, her voice gaining strength. The secrecy. You never talk to anyone. You never open your blinds. Now this. It's not how normal people act. The word normal struck Ethan like a physical blow. He thought of the empty rooms behind him, the suffocating silence, the life he'd lost. No, he wasn't normal. Not anymore. Seeing the standoff was escalating, Rossi tried a different approach. Mr. Hayes, is it? Your name is on the mailbox. Ethan gave a curt nod. Look, Mr. Hayes, you say you were fixing a Wi-Fi issue. You say someone is on your network. That sounds like a legitimate problem. Why don't you just show us what you were looking at on your phone? If it's what you say it is, we'll be on our way, and maybe even help you file a report. It was a reasonable offer, a smart play. But the idea of having to prove his innocence, to perform for them like a trained SEAL, grated on every nerve. He saw Miller's smug look, Lena's fearful certainty. They had already judged him. He looked at Lena, truly looked at her, for the first time. He saw past the accusation to the genuine fear etched around her eyes. It wasn't just malice. It was terror. He didn't understand it, but he recognized it. It was a mirror of the fear that sometimes woke him up in the middle of the night, gasping for air. Fine. He would play the game. For now. He let out a long, slow breath, the fight draining out of him. You want to see the proof? He said, his voice low. You can't see it properly on this small screen. He turned and started walking toward his front door, not waiting to see if they would follow. Come inside. Rossi and Miller exchanged a quick glance. This was an unexpected turn. Ma'am, Rossi called over to Lena. Since you're the complainant, it would be best if you came in as well. Just to observe. Lena hesitated. The thought of entering that dark, silent house, of being in an enclosed space with the man she was convinced was a threat, sent a wave of nausea through her. But the alternative, letting the police handle it alone and not knowing the outcome, was worse. She needed to see this through. She needed to be proven right. Steeling herself, she crossed the street. The heavy oak door of Ethan's house swung open, spilling a sliver of cold, sterile light onto the porch. As she stepped over the threshold, followed by the two officers, the door clicked shut behind them, sealing them inside. The flashing lights of the cruiser continued their silent, rhythmic dance outside, but in here, the world had suddenly become very small and very, very quiet. The inside of Ethan's house felt less like a home and more like a holding cell. The air was still and cool. Cardboard boxes were stacked neatly against one wall, untouched, as if the owner were either just moving in or ready to flee at a moment's notice. There were no family photos on the walls, no knickknacks, no clutter of a life being lived. There was only a cavernous sofa, a coffee table, and a massive dark television screen that dominated the living room like a black hole. Lena's anxiety spiked. The stark emptiness of the space felt wrong, clinical. It wasn't the home of a grieving man. It was the lair of someone who didn't want to leave a trace. Ethan ignored their presence. He moved with a singular, focused purpose, picking up a remote from the coffee table. My phone screen is too small to show you the network topology properly, he said, his back to them. This will be easier to see. With a few taps on his phone, the television flickered to life. It wasn't showing a cable channel or a streaming service. Instead, the screen mirrored his phone, displaying a complex interface of data streams, IP addresses, and signal strength indicators. It looked like something out of a spy movie. Miller shifted his weight, his skepticism still palpable, but now tinged with a flicker of uncertainty. Rossi watched the screen, his expression unreadable. "This is my local network," Ethan began, his voice taking on a detached, lecture-like quality. He used his phone as a trackpad, a cursor moving across the giant screen. "My devices are here, here, and here. All accounted for." He circled his laptop, television, and phone icons. "And this is the intruder." He highlighted a device labeled Aegis Node 01. As you can see, it's not just connected. It's consuming a massive, constant stream of upstream data. He pointed to a graph where a jagged red line dwarfed the others. That's not someone checking their email or watching a movie. That's a continuous upload. They're streaming something out. Lena stared at the screen, her brow furrowed. The technical jargon was mostly lost on her, but she understood the red line. It was an angry, jagged scar on the otherwise calm display. "So someone's stealing your internet," Miller said, crossing his arms. "Annoying, sure, but hardly a 911 level event. It's not what they're taking. It's what they're doing with it," Ethan countered, his fingers moving rapidly on his phone again. He pulled up another window, a terminal filled with scrolling green text. "I wrote a simple packet sniffer to see what kind of data was being transmitted. It's encrypted, of course, but the packet headers, they're all tagged for video." He fell silent, letting the implication hang in the air. Rossi was the first to grasp it. "You're saying they're using your network to broadcast video from a camera somewhere?" "That's exactly what I'm saying." A cold dread, different from her earlier fear, began to creep up Lena's spine. This was moving beyond a creepy neighbor and into something far more sinister. "Can you see the video? Can you decrypt it?" Rossi asked, his voice now sharp with professional curiosity. "Their encryption is good," Ethan admitted, "but they made a mistake. They routed the control signal through an unsecured port, probably to avoid detection by standard security software. It's sloppy but arrogant." He typed a final command. "I can't decrypt their mainstream, but I can hijack the control signal. I can see what their camera sees." He pressed enter. The screen flickered, the lines of code vanishing. For a heart-stopping second, it was black. Then, an image resolved. It was a bedroom. A teenager's bedroom, clothes on the floor, a poster for some band on the wall, a desk cluttered with textbooks and a glowing computer monitor. A boy with headphones on was sitting in a gaming chair, his back to the camera, completely engrossed in the game on his screen. Lena's breath hitched in her throat. Her blood ran cold. The air left her lungs in a silent, horrified rush. It was Marcus's room. It was her son. The camera angle was high, looking down from the corner of the ceiling. She recognized it instantly. It was the feed from the small white security camera she had installed herself. The one she'd told herself was for his safety, to check in on him when she worked late. The one she could access from an app on her phone. The one that was now broadcasting her child's private moments to a stranger. "Oh, my God," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. The world tilted, the sterile room closing in on her. Miller, his earlier arrogance gone, took an involuntary step forward, his eyes wide. "What the hell?" Rossi's face was a mask of grim focus. He looked from the screen to Lena's horrified face, then to Ethan. But Ethan wasn't looking at them. He was still staring at the screen, his expression a mixture of grim satisfaction and something else, something that looked almost like pity. He was typing again. His movements precise and deliberate. "Wait," he said, his voice low and urgent. "There's something else." He brought up a diagnostic panel next to the video feed. A string of data appeared. An IP address. A digital fingerprint. "I can trace the control signal," he murmured, more to himself than to them. "The command is coming from..." He ran a geolocation trace. A small map of Maple Creek appeared on the screen with a single, pulsing red dot. He looked up from his phone, his eyes meeting Lena's. The detached, analytical mask was gone, replaced by a look of stark, chilling revelation. "The signal," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of a death sentence. "It's coming from inside your house." The world narrowed to a single, pulsing red dot on a map. Lena's house. The words, "It's coming from inside your house," echoed in the suffocating silence, stripping the air from her lungs. For a moment, no one moved. The image of Marcus, oblivious in his bedroom, was a silent testament to a horrific violation. Lena's mind, reeling from the whiplash of fear, struggled to process the impossible accusation. That's not possible," she stammered, shaking her head as if to dislodge the thought. Officer Miller, however, latched onto the new information with grim certainty. The confusing, high-tech problem had suddenly become simple. Something he could understand. "The signal is coming from her house?" he asked, his gaze snapping from the screen to Lena. "Who else is home, ma'am?" "No one," she whispered. Just me and my son." The implication was immediate and ugly. Detective Rossi's expression hardened, his brief moment of empathy for Lena evaporating, replaced by the detached focus of an investigator. "We need to go over there. Now." The walk across the street was a blur. Lena felt like she was floating, disconnected from her own body. The manicured lawn, the cheerful yellow front door, everything that had once represented her hard-won sanctuary, now felt like a stage for a nightmare. Rossi knocked, a firm, official rap that sounded alien on her own door. "Marcus!" Lena called, her voice cracking. "Marcus, open the door!" Seconds later, the door swung open. Marcus stood there, headphones slung around his neck, a look of annoyance on his face. "What's going on?" "You're gonna wake up the whole—" His words died as he took in the scene, his mother, pale and trembling. The two police officers, their faces grim. And Ethan Hayes, the creepy neighbor, standing in the background like a specter of doom. "Marcus," Rossi said, his voice leaving no room for argument, "we need to see your room. We need to see your computer." "What? Why?" Marcus's annoyance quickly curdled into fear. He looked at his mother, his eyes wide with confusion. "Mom? What is this?" Lena couldn't answer. She couldn't form the words. They brushed past him and went upstairs. Lena followed, her feet as heavy as lead. In Marcus's room, the scene was exactly as it had been on the television screen moments before. The game was still paused on his monitor. Miller went straight to the computer. Marcus lunged forward instinctively. "Hey, you can't just touch my stuff." "Stay back, son," Rossi warned, his hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Did you install this camera, Marcus?" Miller asked, not looking up from the monitor. "Mom did," Marcus said, his voice a mixture of defiance and panic. "She's obsessed with it. But you know how to access it, don't you? You know the password." "Of course I do. It's my room." Miller's fingers clicked on the mouse. He navigated away from the game, opening the browser history. His face tightened. Well, what do we have here?" He turned the monitor for Rossi to see. The screen was filled with search queries. Wi-Fi cracking software, how to hide IP address, bypassing network security protocols. There were links to hacker forums, articles on digital privacy invasion. Each entry was a nail in his coffin. "I was just curious," Marcus exclaimed, his voice rising to a panicked shout. I didn't do anything. I was just reading." "It looks like more than reading, kid," Miller said grimly. Lena felt the floor drop out from under her. It was all there. The evidence. The Motivia, rebellious teenager, acting out against his overprotective mother. It made a sick kind of sense. The violation wasn't from a stranger. It was from her own son. The thought was a betrayal so profound it hollowed her out. "Marcus," she breathed, the name a pained whisper. "How could you?" "I didn't," he cried, his eyes filling with tears of desperation. "Mom, you have to believe me. I didn't do it." But looking at the damning evidence on the screen, how could she? Doubt, poisonous and swift, seeped into her heart. Had she pushed him to this? Had her own fear created the very monster she was trying to protect him from? Rossi spoke, his voice formal. "We're going to have to take the computer and router as evidence. Marcus, we need you to come down to the station to answer some questions." The world dissolved into a cacophony of Marcus's frantic denials and the cold, procedural language of the police. Lena stood frozen in the doorway as they led her son away. From across the hall, she saw Ethan Hayes watching. His expression was unreadable, but in his eyes, she saw not the satisfaction of a man who'd been vindicated, but the weary resignation of someone who understood that the simplest answer was rarely the right one. As the police car pulled away, taking her son with it, the quiet whispers of the neighborhood began. Curtains twitched. Phones lit up. The news spread like a virus. Lena Washington, the concerned neighbor, was now the mother of the neighborhood stalker. She was alone, isolated in the home that was no longer a sanctuary, but a crime scene. The silence inside deafening, broken only by the sound of her own heart breaking. Sleep was a luxury Ethan couldn't afford. Long after the police cars had gone, and an unnerving quiet had settled back over Maple Creek, he sat in his sterile living room, the glow of his laptop casting long shadows on the walls. He wasn't looking at his own network anymore. He was replaying the events of the night in his head. And the pieces didn't fit. The browser history on the kid's computer was too perfect, too obvious. It was the digital equivalent of a burglar stopping to write, "I was here" on the wall. Hacking, real hacking, was about stealth, about subtlety. Whoever had set up the Aegis Note 01 device was a professional. They were meticulous, patient, and skilled. A curious teenager downloading free cracking tools from a public forum was not a professional. This wasn't a crime of teenage rebellion. This was a setup. He stared out his window at Lena Washington's house. A single light burned in an upstairs window. He imagined her in there, alone, her world shattered by a conclusion that felt neat, tidy, and utterly wrong. He recognized the look he'd seen in her eyes as they took her son away. The same hollowed-out despair he saw in his own reflection every morning. It was the look of someone whose life had been fractured by forces beyond their control. For the first time since Sarah's death, a flicker of something other than grief or annoyance stirred within him. It was a sense of injustice. He closed his laptop, stood up, and walked out the door. The chill of the night air did little to cool the resolve solidifying in his gut. He crossed the street, his footsteps echoing in the silence, and walked up the path to the cheerful yellow door that now seemed like a cruel joke. He hesitated for only a moment before knocking, the sound soft but firm. The door opened a crack. Lena's face, pale and tear-streaked, appeared in the gap. Her eyes, red-rimmed and exhausted, widened in a mixture of fear and anger when she saw him. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice a raw rasp. "Haven't you done enough?" "I don't think your son did it," Ethan said, getting straight to the point. Lena stared at him, bewildered. "What?" The hack was too sophisticated. The evidence against him is too convenient. It's a frame job. She leaned her forehead against the door, a shudder running through her. Why would you say that? Why would you care? It was a fair question. He was the man she had accused, the man whose life she had turned upside down in a single phone call. "Because I know what it's like," he said, the words tasting foreign on his tongue. "To have your life defined by one event, to have everyone look at you and see only a monster or a victim." He paused. "And because I was a cybersecurity analyst for 12 years, I know what professional work looks like. This was professional." He saw the war in her eyes, the instinct to slam the door on the man who had started this nightmare, versus the desperate, flickering hope that he might be the only one who could end it. Hope won. She opened the door wider. "Come in." Inside, the house was the complete opposite of his own. It was warm, cluttered with the artifacts of a life. Photos on the mantle, a stack of magazines on the coffee table, a half-finished puzzle. It felt achingly normal. They sat in her kitchen, a pot of coffee brewing between them. The aroma, a small comfort in the tense air. An idea began to form in Ethan's mind. A risky one. Just then, his phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. He answered, his guard up. "Mr. Hayes? This is Detective Rossi." Ethan was stunned into silence. "Listen," Rossi's voice was low, conspiratorial. "I'm not supposed to be doing this, but this whole thing, it stinks. A case tying up this neatly usually means someone worked hard to tie the bow." He paused. "I'm sending you a file. It's an anonymized disk image from the kid's computer. I didn't get a warrant for a full forensic deep dive, just a surface-level check. Officially, the case is closed pending juvenile review. Unofficially, I'd appreciate a second opinion. From a professional, this conversation never happened. The line went dead. A moment later, a secure download link appeared on Ethan's phone. He looked at Lena, a new, dangerous energy humming between them. It wasn't friendship, not yet. It was something more primal, a shared enemy. Rossi thinks something's wrong too, Ethan said, showing her the phone. He just gave me the evidence. Lena stared at the phone, then at Ethan. The fear in her eyes was still there, but now it was forged into something harder, determination. What do we do? She asked, her voice quiet but firm. Ethan turned his laptop around on the kitchen table, the screen a blank slate. We find out who's really watching your son, he said. We find out who's watching all of us. For the next 48 hours, Lena's kitchen became a command center. The scent of stale coffee and the low hum of Ethan's laptop replaced any semblance of normal life. While Ethan, fueled by a grim intensity Lena hadn't seen before, dove into the data from Marcus's computer, Lena played her part. She became a grieving, apologetic mother. A role that felt sickeningly easy to perform. She walked her dog at odd hours, striking up carefully orchestrated conversations with neighbors. She'd mentioned Marcus's terrible mistake, her voice trembling, and then casually pivot. It all started with our internet acting up. Have you had any issues? I'm thinking of switching providers. Most offered sympathy and recommendations, but a pattern began to emerge. 3 families, the Hendersons in the colonial revival, the Kleins in the modern glass house, and the Abbotts at the end of the cul-de-sac mentioned recent bizarre technical glitches. More importantly, when Lena asked who they'd called for help, the same name came up every time. Oh, you have to call Arthur Vance, Mrs. Henderson had said, her voice full of praise. He runs that little tech support business from his home. A genius, truly. He used to have some big startup in California. He fixed our smart home system in an hour. Such a kind man. And so reasonable. Lena felt a chill despite the warm afternoon sun. She delivered the name to Ethan, who gave a non-committal grunt, his eyes never leaving the screen. He had bypassed the surface-level data on Marcus's hard drive and was now exploring the hidden partitions, the digital shadows. The browser history and downloaded files had been a smokescreen. The real malware was a ghost, a sophisticated rootkit that had been planted and then erased its own entry point, leaving behind only the curated, amateurish evidence. He was a ghost, Ethan murmured, leaning back in his chair, rubbing his tired eyes. The hacker was never on Marcus's computer. He just used it as a proxy, a remote control puppet. He tunneled in, planted the fake search history, and tunneled out. The kid never had a chance. Then, he found the core of it. Deep in the network logs from the router Rossi had let him borrow, he isolated the traffic from the Aegis Nodo 1 device. He couldn't break the master encryption, but he found a flaw in the way the data was indexed. Like a librarian's card catalog left unsecured, he couldn't read the books, but he could read all the titles. The file names were not random strings. They were notations, chillingly specific. Henderson Tuesday 11 p.m. audio clip. MP4. Klein Financial's screen recording. Mauve. Abbott safe combination. Camera 2.4. Oh God, Lena breathed, reading over his shoulder. He's not just watching, Ethan said, his voice grim. He's curating. He's collecting leverage. His fingers flew across the keyboard, his focus absolute. He found a partially corrupted log file, a fragment of a text document that hadn't been properly scrubbed. It contained a list. It was a list of names: the Hendersons, the Kleins, the Abbotts, and 2 others, and next to each name was a dollar amount, all of them 6 figures. It was a blackmail ledger. This wasn't a teenager's prank. This wasn't a random pervert. This was a cold, calculated operation. Arthur Vance, Lena whispered, the name now tasting like poison. Everyone trusts him. He's been in their homes. He's had access to everything. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place in Ethan's mind, and it was colder and more terrifying than he could have imagined. This wasn't just a hacker. This was a predator who had disguised himself as a savior, using his neighbor's trust as his skeleton key. He started a new diagnostic, a deep scan of his own network's history, searching for any trace, any signature that might link back to the source. He had to find the command server. As the program ran, he saw a flicker in the Codia subroutine he hadn't seen before. It was a kill switch, a self-destruct sequence designed to wipe every drive on the network, erase every log, and turn the entire system into digital dust. And it was being activated. He knows, Ethan said, his blood running cold. Somehow, he knows we're on to him. He's trying to erase everything. As if on cue, the power in the kitchen died. The lights went out. The refrigerator fell silent. The only illumination came from the dying glow of Ethan's laptop screen. Then, that too went black. In the sudden, oppressive darkness, a single line of text burned itself onto the screen in stark red letters. A message from the ghost in the machine. Aegis is always watching. Panic, cold and sharp, seized Lena. The darkness in the kitchen was absolute. The sudden silence, a deafening roar. The red letters on the screen, Aegis is always watching, felt like a physical presence in the room. A malevolent eye staring out from the void. What do we do? She whispered, her voice tight with fear. But Ethan was already moving. The fear that had paralyzed Lena had galvanized him. This was his world. For the first time in over a year, he wasn't a grieving husband or a recluse. He was a combatant. He cut the power to the house, but my laptop battery is still good. He's trying to lock me out of the network remotely before he scrubs the evidence, Ethan explained. His voice, a low, urgent hum. His fingers were a blur on the keyboard, the faint clicking the only sound in the room. He's good. He's trying to brute force my admin password while simultaneously executing the wipe command. He's fighting a war on two fronts. Aegis, Lena said, her mind racing, trying to connect the pieces. That word, where have I heard that? Ethan didn't look up. It's a shield from Greek mythology, a symbol of protection. No, that's not it, she insisted, pacing the small kitchen. The praise from her neighbors echoed in her head. A genius, truly. He used to have some big startup in California. Her blood ran cold. She grabbed her phone, her thumb fumbling with the flashlight app. The beam cut through the darkness as she frantically typed a search query into her browser. Ethan, she said, her voice trembling as she read the search results. Aegis Secure. It was a cybersecurity startup based out of Palo Alto. It went bankrupt 2 years ago. Its founder was Arthur Vance. The final horrifying piece slammed into place. The kindly, down-on-his-luck tech expert wasn't just the man with the means and opportunity. He was the architect of the entire system. Aegis Node. Oh, one wasn't a random name. It was a tombstone. A bitter monument to his own failure, now repurposed into a weapon. He's not just trying to wipe the drives, Ethan realized. A new, more immediate horror dawning on him. He's watching us, right now. Through my own laptop camera, he slapped the laptop lid shut. He knows we've identified him. The darkness no longer felt empty. It felt occupied, as if summoned by the thought. Lena's phone began to ring. The cheerful, generic ringtone was a grotesque intrusion. The screen displayed an unknown number. Her hand shook as she looked at Ethan, who gave a sharp, definitive nod. She answered, putting the call on speaker. Hello, Lena. The voice was calm, familiar, and utterly chilling. It was the friendly, helpful voice of Arthur Vance. There was no hint of panic, only a placid, terrifying control. I have to admit, I'm impressed, Arthur continued, his voice smooth as silk. Especially your friend. He's better than I anticipated. It's a shame he's wasting his talent in a place like this. What do you want, Arthur? Lena managed, her voice barely a whisper. What I want is for you to stop. You're meddling in things that are far above your pay grade. I was hoping to make this clean. A simple case of a delinquent teenager getting his comeuppance. But you two just couldn't leave it alone. A faint sound came through the speaker. A metallic click. It sounded close. Too close. I think it's best you and Mr. Hayes stay right where you are. Don't try to call anyone. Don't try to leave the house. After all, he paused, letting the threat hang in the air. Who would the police believe? A hysterical mother and a paranoid recluse? Or the man who has the entire neighborhood's digital history at his fingertips? Another sound came through the phone. A different click. This one was sharper, heavier. It was the sound of a deadbolt being unlocked. It sounded like it was coming from her own front door. The click of the deadbolt echoed the finality of a closing coffin lid. Arthur was here. He hadn't just breached their digital lives. He was now crossing the physical threshold into Lena's home, confident in his absolute control. Keep him talking, Ethan mouthed in the darkness, his face a grim mask in the thin glow of Lena's phone. While Arthur had been monologuing, Ethan had been working, his laptop still closed. He had tethered it to his own phone's hotspot, creating a tiny independent island in Arthur's dead network. He was fighting back. Lena's mind raced. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but the terror was now mixed with a cold, hard fury. You won't get away with this, Arthur, she said into the phone, her voice steadier than she felt. Why are you doing this? To people who trusted you? Trust? Arthur's laugh was a dry, rustling sound. They didn't trust me. They pitied me, the failed genius from California. They let me into their home so they could feel good about themselves. They have everything, Lena, and they appreciate none of it. I'm not a common thief. I'm a correction, a balancing of the scales. Footsteps creaked in the living room. He was inside. He's not on your Wi-Fi anymore, Ethan whispered, his fingers flying across his keyboard in the dark. He's on a cellular network. It's harder to trace, but it's not impossible. You framed my son, Lena said, her voice rising. You are going to ruin a child's life. He was a perfect variable, Arthur replied coolly. A troubled kid with a nosy mother. A convenient narrative. Collateral damage is a necessary part of any elegant solution. That was it. That was the final piece Ethan needed. While Arthur was distracted by his own ego, Ethan wasn't trying to fight him for control of the Aegis network anymore. That was a battle he couldn't win in time. Instead, he was doing something much simpler. He was recording everything. He isolated the incoming call, packaged the audio file of Arthur's confession, and bundled it with the single most damning piece of evidence he'd found. The uncorrupted blackmail ledger. It was a Hail Mary, a desperate digital message in a bottle. He opened a secure connection to Ghost of a backdoor he'd built for a government contract years ago. One he never thought he'd use again. His fingers typed the recipient's name, Detective Rossi. He hit send. The upload bar crawled across the screen with agonizing slowness. The footsteps were closer now, just outside the kitchen doorway. It's a shame, really, Arthur's voice came. No longer from the phone, but from the darkness just beyond the threshold. I thought you two might have understood. Outcasts, just like me. A bright beam from a powerful flashlight cut through the dark, pinning Lena and Ethan. Arthur stood there, a crowbar held loosely in one hand. His face was no longer kind or pitiable. It was a cold, arrogant mask of superiority. But I see now you're just part of the problem, he said, taking a step into the kitchen. Now, give me the laptop. We're going to erase this little misunderstanding for good. He took another step. But just as he did, the night outside erupted. Red and blue lights flooded through the kitchen windows, painting the walls in strobing, frantic colors. The wail of sirens, distant at first, grew to a deafening crescendo right outside the house. Arthur froze, his mask of control shattering into pure, unfiltered shock. He spun around, staring at the flashing lights. How? Detective Rossi's voice boomed from a megaphone outside. Arthur Vance? This is the police. The house is surrounded. Come out with your hands up. Arthur looked from the windows back to Ethan, his eyes wide with disbelief and fury. He had controlled every camera, every network, every line of code. He had been a god in his own digital world. He never imagined they could simply go around it. He dropped the crowbar with a clatter that echoed the collapse of his entire empire. A few days later, a fragile peace had settled over Maple Creek. The news of Arthur's arrest and the scope of his crimes had sent shockwaves through the community. replacing quiet judgment with shame and disbelief. Marcus was home, his record wiped clean. The initial anger he'd felt toward his mother had been replaced by a quiet, newfound understanding. The world was more complicated than he had thought. Lena and Ethan sat on her front porch swing, a comfortable silence between them. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow over the neighborhood. "I'm sorry, Ethan," Lena said softly, not looking at him. "For how it started. I saw a threat that wasn't there." Ethan watched Marcus toss a basketball in the driveway, the rhythmic thud, a peaceful, grounding sound. "You saw a threat," he corrected her gently. "You were just looking at the wrong house. You did what you had to do to protect your son." "I get that." He paused, looking at his own hands. "For a long time, I thought burying my past was the only way to survive it. But I was wrong. You can't just turn it off. Sometimes you have to use it." He had used his skills, not to build walls, but to tear one down. Lena had used her fear, not as a cage, but as a catalyst to fight for her family. They were both survivors, scarred in different ways, who had found an unexpected anchor in the storm. It wasn't a storybook ending. The neighborhood's trust was broken, and the scars of what had happened would take a long time to fade. But as they sat there, two people who had started as suspicious strangers, they weren't alone anymore. They had forged a new kind of network, one built not on code and signals, but on shared experience, and a hard-won, mutual respect. The sun dipped below the horizon, and for the first time in a long time, the encroaching darkness didn't feel like a threat. It just felt like the peaceful end to a long day.